Welcome to the Better Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm Ciaran O'Connor.
I'm John Wood Jr.
Yes, sir. What's up, John?
What's going on, Ciaran? How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's good to see you. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, I guess. We've just been that busy.
We have been.
We've been crisscrossing the country, sometimes in different directions, you know.
And we're getting on a plane tomorrow.
We are. Oh, geez. I haven't washed any of my clothes or anything.
Oh, yeah? I can kind of smell it.
I washed what I'm wearing.
John always smells great.
But yeah, I've got that natural, that naturally good smelling body odor.
You know, I got to hug President Obama once.
I remember that.
And he smelled delightful.
Yes, he said he smelled like mint and chocolate.
Talcum powder, a little sandalwood. Incredibly inspiring aroma.
I've got to say this. The President of the United States should smell good. It just doesn't matter of representing our country.
Yes.
I feel like it is important. Whoever he be or she be, whatever party, it doesn't matter. Presidential smell, I think, is something that is important to the reputation, the esteem of the nation.
Yes, but he or she should also make sure that their scent is not too red or too blue. It's got to be both patriotic and empathetic.
That's right, yeah.
Better Angels will be launching a fragrance line in 2020, so look out for that.
Let us know, folks, what the most polarizing perfumes and colognes are.
Right after we release our dating app.
View. Okay, yeah, there you go.
But yeah, this weekend we are going to Oregon to speak to the League of Oregon Cities, which is a consortium of mayors and other municipal officials from across the state of Oregon,
right,
who are gathering for their annual conference, and we are there to talk about problem of polarization.
That's right.
How that's increasingly filtering down to local communities and the problems that local officials are facing.
Right.
And how some of the things we talk about at Better Angels and what we've learned through our work might be useful to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because when we talk about polarization, it's very visible at the national level, and we know that the national conversation will bleed into people's workplace relationships, their family relationships, and suddenly the left-right divide will pull people apart, even in their most intimate circumstances. Local politics tends historically to be a little bit more resistant to that kind of dynamic because people are less concerned about the broad identity issues and more concerned about making sure that the potholes are filled, making sure that the trash gets picked up. But even then, there's evidence to show that on a municipal level, national political conversations are making it hard for people to work together locally on some of these more mundane aspects of just making sure that the trains run on time. Although I'm not sure that's a municipal issue, but as a phrase, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of what we'll be talking about in Oregon. Looking forward to seeing maybe some Better Angels members up there, and reporting back to you folks in terms of how it went. But it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it should be super interesting, and it kind of comes at a germane time because Better Angels has started to do a little bit of work with local elected officials. I know in Massachusetts, they're bringing together a couple state representatives just for a conversation, a Better Angels conversation. But it'll be exciting as we move into 2020 to think about how we can start inviting elected officials, maybe candidates, into Better Angels programming, but doing it in a way that is in keeping with our ethos. And, it's a challenge and an opportunity, but it should be fun. I'm looking forward to doing it.
Yeah, man. Me too.
So one other thing I thought I should bring up before we dive into the news of the day, of which there has been much. You might be leaving the nest with your own podcast.
Well, I'll still be in and around the nest. Right?
Yes.
I'll still be jumping on the Better Angels podcast to join yourself and our coterie of guys and gals and friends and buds of the pod. But launching a podcast creatively titled The John Wood Jr. Show.
Eponymous.
Yeah, right. There you go. I thought of that all by myself. And one of the reasons I'm interested in doing that is because I think that we're all interested. That is to say, Better Angels, our members, our leaders, and folks more broadly in the dialogue space, diligently toiling away at the work of creating space for Americans to get to know one another again. I think we're all interested in seeing that work scale up, to see it blossom, and to see a broader kind of culture shift in the way we talk about politics in America. But I think that has a lot to do with how we look at ourselves as Americans, how we understand sort of the larger identity of the country and sort of who we are in relationship to one another within it, across the political and across some of these other divides. And I think that to do that, it's important to kind of invite Americans into a conversation to sort of explore an ongoing story about who it is we are, to kind of build a narrative that is born from experience and observation, that just sort of looks at the best aspects and the most enduring aspects of progressive and conservative values, and from that sort of imagine, just what is America, beyond the political divide. And so it's a big question, but I think that it's one kind of worth looking at very with very open eyes, as a way of kind of rediscovering a shared American identity that can hold us true to each other in the midst of some of the craziness that you and I are about to talk about here in the news and so forth, and undoubtedly, in the 2020 election just ahead of us. And so, so the John Ward Jr. show is going to be about kind of digging into just sort of what is the American story, if you will. What is an American story that all of us as Americans can resonate with? And so, it's a subject that I look forward to digging into and to holding a space for, because I think that as we come to understand each other in a unified sort of way, it becomes possible for us to discover a language by which we can shift the broader conversation in this country in a more constructive and durable sort of direction. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing on that.
Amen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
excited to listen to it.
Mhm.
Those are some powerful and weighty themes, and ones that I think you're very well prepared to take on and lead on.
Well, powerful and weighty. That's where I live, man. That's
Yeah, man.
my,
I'm also getting
That's
maybe
my
some,
wheelhouse.
fireside chat vibes too.
yeah, fireside chat vibes. I'd say that's about right.
Kick back, let the flames crackle.
Yeah, hey, Mr. Producer, can we get a fireplace in here sometime? Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. So yeah, maybe we can make that literal.
Cool,
at some
man.
point.
Well, yeah,
winter's coming. So
winter is coming.
Mhm.
Never too bad in LA though.
yeah, there you go.
So yeah, look out for the John Wood Jr. show. It's coming soon. I think probably can listen to the first episode next week, right?
More likely than not. But you'll hear from us soon.
Cool. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about the news. It's been a bit of a crazy week, although it's always crazy. This week's felt a little bit more frenetic than usual.
Right. Well, nothing big happened this week. Just the announcement of official impeachment inquiry into the President of the United States by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, in response to a whistleblower report that was sent up the chain of command to the Inspector General, and that came to the attention of Congress, revealing or seeming to reveal, I guess, depending on, or not revealing, depending, and misinterpreted depending on how you're looking at it, the fact that President Trump, or the idea that President Trump, in a conversation with the president of the Ukraine, don't ask me to repeat or pronounce his name. I'm leaning on you for that, Ciaran. The idea is that President Trump leaned on the president of Ukraine to investigate former Vice President, current Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, because Joe Biden, while Vice President of the United States, had leaned on the Ukrainian government to fire a prosecutor on the basis of corruption, a Ukrainian prosecutor who I believe was looking into an American company that just so happened to have Hunter Biden on its board of directors. And so
It was a Ukrainian company.
Oh, it was a Ukrainian company? Oh, I
Mhm.
thought it was an American company operating in Ukraine. Okay, well, it was a Ukrainian company then. And in any event, Donald Trump, so there have been allegations that from some quarters that Joe Biden acted in his own political self-interest to protect his son by leaning on the Ukrainians to dump this prosecutor. But the prosecutor was widely seen as corrupt, and so Vice President Biden at the time cited that as the reason why he leaned on the Ukrainians to fire this prosecutor. Now President Trump, on the basis of that, is now being accused of leaning on the president of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and using the possible withholding of American military aid funds to Ukraine as leverage to get him to do this. President Trump is now being accused of, through a quid pro quo, essentially abusing the power of his office and the leverage he has over Ukraine's national security to pursue his own political interests. And so on the merit of that point of view, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is supporting official impeachment inquiry of the president. And so, I guess it's been a long time coming because certainly folks in the Democratic Congress and well beyond it have been pushing for Nancy Pelosi to support an impeachment inquiry for a very long time. And she's been resistant all this time, but now it has finally happened. And, your thoughts?
That was a good summary.
I hope so. This stuff gets so convoluted.
It is.
It's
well, right before we came in here, John was like, "Man, I haven't really been reading the news." That was pretty good.
I listen to, I try and take in a lot of different sources, but I find myself so busy these days with our work at Better Angels that it's hard for me to diversify as much. I listen to a fair amount of Ben Shapiro. And the thing I like about Ben, put aside Ben's particular political and historical views, he's really good at just breaking down what happened in the news. And I think he tries his best to be impartial and precise about it. So when he's just describing things, I always get the sense that he's trying to be very careful in giving you the details sort of as they happened, and not editorializing about them too much until he gets to the opinion part of his commentary. So I'd be curious to know who you tend to trust or like to listen to in an informational capacity.
Well, the last time I encountered Ben Shapiro was on Twitter, and he was launching a diatribe against rap music.
That sounds about right. He's not a big hip hop guy.
Yeah, not a big hip hop guy. He was like arguing it's not an art form or something.
Right.
Anyway,
sounds like my dad.
I don't think that speaks to his credibility as a political commentator.
I think he's more of a classical.
He really likes standards,
Yeah, right. He's a good violinist too.
Yeah. What kind of news sources? I also, over the past couple of days have been trying to digest a pretty broad spectrum of news sources. I grew up in New York City, so I kind of grew up reading the New York Times, like the actual paper version. And somehow I think you really more closely absorb the news when you read something physically. Because I was on vacation with my dad 2 weeks ago, and so we were actually like reading the paper. And I was like, man, I'm remembering a lot more of this than when I'm just scrolling on my phone. So it's something psychological. So all that is to say, I've always had a pretty close relationship with the gray lady, as they call the Times.
Right.
And, as part of a close, friendly relationship, that means that I often criticize it when I think that they've misstepped. But I think, it's hard to argue with the fact that they have pretty significant resources and experience. And I think, as you said with Ben Shapiro, who's a commentator, they have an opinion section as well. I think they do try to keep up a firewall. I think sometimes, bias will seep in, especially as, sort of news analysis has become more commonplace. But, I think they do a lot of original reporting you can't find anywhere else. So I read the Times a lot, and I've been reading about these latest news developments in the Times, but I've also really wanted to, like I said, digest other sources. So I've been reading National Review, which I know is, for a long time, was kind of a standard bearer in conservative circles, although I don't think they're really that representative of the average Red these days, given that, they published a lot of Never Trump stuff. A lot of their key writers are Never Trumpers. So I've also been trying to read, Fox News, Breitbart, and the Atlantic, Slate, the Federalist. I've been trying to just kind of, search around because it's always fascinating to me to see how people are covering the same story. And it sort of ranges from like, one newspaper will choose to really like highlight one piece of the news, or almost do it in kind of a breathless fashion. And I think that's one way that bias comes through. And I think some other news sources just kind of make no bones about the fact that they are a partisan operation. I sometimes get that vibe from Fox News that it seems like it's, almost coordinating with the White House in some respects.
Although the news department at Fox
is different from the opinion. That's a fair point. I'm talking more about, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity. Right. And I know they're
those are the opinion guys.
So all of that is to say I've been following this story closely just because it's just fascinating. Yeah. One other piece of this story, just as an aside, which I think is hilarious, and I don't know if you know this, but the president of Ukraine, whose last name is Zelensky, it's possible I'm mispronouncing that, but I think it's Zelensky. I think
that's right, yeah.
He is a political neophyte, like President Trump, and was previously a comedian.
Oh, he was?
Had no political experience whatsoever.
Okay.
And he was in a popular TV show in which he played somebody who started railing against corruption and improbably became president. And then that happened in real life.
He must be good on the show.
So that's the background.
That's what we need in Ukraine.
That's the background for this call. These two guys who lead their countries, but, 5 years ago were in entertainment.
Right. That is interesting.
The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this all takes place within the larger context of the overall U.S.-Ukraine relationship, Ukraine's role in the Russia investigation, and President Trump's desire to dig up dirt on his political rivals. So Rudy Giuliani, who I know well, not personally, former mayor of New York City.
Being a New Yorker yourself.
He's always been a bit of a bulldog. He is, I believe he still is, the president's personal lawyer. Right. And a few months ago was sort of publicly announcing that he was going to Ukraine, to try to root out corruption. And clearly, in my view, was doing so in consultation with the president. And so there's sort of this larger framework of the president trying to find out more information that might be in his personal political interests, and to do so with his personal lawyer, obviously, who's not, beholden to citizens like the State Department or, the National Security Council or whatever else. Right. So I think it's important to keep in mind that this is existing within a larger context. And I think you're right to say that the transcript of the call and the subsequent release of the whistleblower complaint, it does leave some room for ambiguity in terms of whether there was like an explicit quid pro quo. I mean, Trump didn't say, if you don't look up, or if you don't get me dirt on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, like, you're not getting the aid.
Right. He did not say that.
He did not say that.
And they wound up releasing the aid.
They did after
the call.
There was a bipartisan call from Congress, because members of Congress were kind of like, why is this aid getting held up? And the White House was giving kind of shifting explanations. Right. Well,
I think that the theme of the explanations was that, or at least one of the themes was that there was concerns about corruption, right? Which obviously Joe Biden himself had as vice president. And so it's not an implausible explanation, although the timing of all these things is more than enough to at least raise suspicion on the part of on the part of many folks.
Right. But what I think is not as open to interpretation, if you read the transcript or the reconstruction, as some people are calling it, is that President Trump did solicit help from a foreign government on a political opponent, to get information on a political opponent.
Right.
So essentially using the power of the presidency to get information on a political opponent that would help him in a political way.
Regardless of whether there's a quid pro quo or not, right?
Right. I mean, he said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to do this for me.
Right.
And sort of specifically mentioned the Bidens. He specifically mentioned Giuliani, which again I think is important because Giuliani had been really pushing this for several months.
Right.
And he also did mention the aid as well in the call.
Sure.
So yes, there's no explicit
He
quid
didn't
pro
mention
quo,
it
but I
in
think
the same context, but
right.
In the same conversation, of course.
So I mean, I guess if you read the transcript, you can think about, is it implied quid pro quo? Can you think about, does this rise to the level of an impeachable offense? I think all of those things are open to interpretation. But I think what's pretty clear to me is that this is not a proper way for a president to conduct himself, to essentially put his own personal political interest ahead of the national interest.
Well, so the impeachment proceedings, I imagine, will move out of the House, and then will be stymied in the Republican-controlled Senate. And so there's not, barring some further revelations that are just, damning far beyond anything that has come to light now.
It would need to be more than one person shot on Fifth Avenue.
I think that there's not a great likelihood that we're going to see the president removed from office as a consequence of that. And so, the real question winds up becoming simply, how does this play politically? Is it something that winds up tarnishing the president's credibility or integrity or image in the eyes of Americans who support him still and currently through all of the back and forth of between him and Congress and Mueller, et cetera, over the course of the last couple of years? Or does it wind up being a story that the headline of which is that the Democrats once again overreached and zealously have tried to remove a president from office who didn't do anything to warrant impeachment, or, maybe he did something bad, but not things that Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton haven't done, similarly themselves in the past. And so the one thing I think, and so that's just something that'll shake out over the course of time. But I think one thing we know is that the issue itself is going to be starkly divisive. Right.
What does this do to the country?
Right.
Beyond just the political considerations, which I think it's hard to know, right? I mean, I think no matter what, I think there's going to be a deepening of division, kind of a circling of wagons.
Right.
There's not too many people who I think are going to change their mind at this point, although I do think public support for impeachment will rise beyond the 30 or 40% that it's at now. Yeah. Because the public support for impeachment is significantly lower than the percentage of people who disapprove of President Trump, which suggests there are a lot of people who strongly disapprove of Trump, but don't necessarily think he should be impeached, either because they don't think impeachment is warranted, or they think that it's going to be needlessly divisive and obviously unsuccessful and distract people's attention from these issues that are more important. But I do think it'll go up after this. Because not only do you have the transcript, you now also have this whistleblower complaint, and obviously there's always going to be people who think it's nakedly partisan, but it does indicate that, or it does claim that the White House subsequently sought to cover up the transcript. Normally these transcripts are kind of exist within a computer system that is, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but essentially they tried to sort of hide the transcript afterwards. They tried to move it to a more classified system They tried to kind of
Now,
get out ahead of
I
it.
wasn't aware of that. I thought that the way this worked was that the White House was more or less upfront in turning over the transcript, but they didn't want to turn over the whistleblower report to begin with.
Well, originally the way this came up was that the whistleblower took it to the Inspector General,
right,
in the hopes of it going to Congress, which is sort of the standard application of the law, is that Congress, as part of its constitutional oversight responsibilities, should become privy to any whistleblower complaints that are deemed urgent by the Inspector General. And so, the White House didn't want this information to go to Congress. It sort of started to leak. President Trump decided to release the transcript. I think he thought that it might vindicate him more in the eyes of the public than it may have. But my larger point is that I think we have to be patient because a lot more information is going to come out, I think, in a torrent probably.
Right.
But it seems like there's not just sort of the initial revelation about a potential abuse of power. There's also kind of like a subsequent cover-up. And if you go back to Watergate, the line is always, it wasn't the original crime, it was the cover-up. I don't know if that holds true here because, again, I think it's sort of a rhetorical exercise because the president's not going to be removed from office.
Right.
And this is just sort of Democrats drawing a line in the sand, and one that I frankly support just from a precedent-setting reason. Because I think future presidents are going to look back on this as a way to determine, what is impeachable, what does constitute an abuse of power.
Right.
But I think your larger point is important about what does this do to the country, and how can we continue to make progress in talking with people we disagree about when things feel so raw and things feel so current. It's almost kind of like a Rorschach test, as you said. People see in this whatever confirms their pre-existing bias. It sort of naturally lends itself to whataboutisms. You say, well, what about Biden? What about Hillary? And then you say, well, that doesn't compare to Trump, and then vice versa. And you're already kind of inflamed. So what would your advice be to a Democrat or Republican who the impeachment comes up at the water cooler or at the family dinner table, and they're like, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, my okay, so I mean, there's a couple potentially different layers there, but fundamentally, I think that we have a choice to make as Americans in terms of how we are going to deal with each other, regardless of what is taking place in the halls of power between our leaders.
Right.
I think that so just like between you and me, for instance, I'm a bit skeptical, I think, of the idea of impeaching the president over this, simply because it's not overwhelmingly evident to me that the evidence on the table is conclusive enough that he did something, deliberately malicious or manipulative or self-serving to warrant impeachment, even though I think it looks really bad. That's my own personal view. Now, I'm just looking at this one instance in and of itself. You can take it within the broader context of everything else the president has done or is alleged to have done, and possibly reach a different conclusion.
Right.
But let's just say there's a difference between you and I on this point. You and I can talk about the substance of the issue and come to a different conclusion about something that's honestly very important for the country.
Absolutely.
But what's more important, both to your and my relationship as colleagues, as neighbors, and as friends, is to be able to have a sense of where the other person is coming from and why, so we can work together effectively to make this a country a better country, a more perfect union, regardless of who wins re-election in 2020. And on the subject of the issue at hand, we can at the very least sort of clarify for each other just what it is we agree about and what it is we disagree about, and why, so that maybe we can sort of come to some stronger consensus in terms of, How is it the president should be acting? How is it the Congress should be responding to or overseeing the White House? How is it that we ought to be interrogating future presidential candidates to make sure that they uphold themselves when in office in a way that reaches up to our higher standards of conduct for our elected officials, regardless of party, right? And not instead engage in this sort of race to the bottom to where
I was going to say the bar's gotten pretty low.
Yeah, exactly. Where we're willing to just sort of overlook some of the worst insults and behaviors and, just all the ways in which our politicians sort of either don't engage truthfully with issues or demean their opponents and their opponents' supporters for the sake of the gain of power. We can build, you and I and everybody else listening to us here, in relationship with one another, we can build a democratic culture that honors the higher values of our republic if we choose to do that together by engaging the right way. And we can engage with each other the right way while still disagreeing on the specifics of important questions, even questions such as whether or not we should be impeaching the president of the United States. But if we allow our answer to that question to become a signifier of whether or not you and I are or ought to be tribal enemies of one another, and essentially oppose each other on every other front in a way that damages our ability to work together politically, in private life, or to even be friends, then the decision we have made is to rip apart the social fabric in the United States and to make sure that our political culture is one that can sustain progress and liberty and equality and opportunity no more. No more for our children's generation and no more for generations after that.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. It requires letting go in some ways. And you kind of have to think about, what are you letting go of?
Right.
Because I think a lot of people feel like if they let go of the animosity that's so tied into how they feel about politics, that they are somehow letting go of their own sense of moral righteousness or moral force that they don't want to let go of, and frankly, that they needn't let go of. And so it's almost like you need to do a bit of disentangling in your own mind, which is very challenging to do because these are all such emotional issues. And because, people's identities are increasingly intertwined with their political preferences. And so people perceive, an insult from the other side as like a personal attack on them, even if it's just they're reading an insult that one politician lobbed at the other one. Because it's like, you're attacking a member of my tribe. My tribe needs to stick together in order to protect ourselves from enemies. It's all very human.
That's what Better Angels board member Jonathan Rauch was writing about in National Affairs
recently.
Exactly. This idea that our polarization has gotten to a point to where it's not even really, to a significant degree, it's not about ideas or ideology anymore. I mean, at some point, that's where the differences germinate, but eventually it just gets to the point to where our identities just congeal on one side of the aisle or the other, and we define what we are against on the basis of who might be for something, or
totally
we choose to be against something because the other side is for it, and vice versa.
And I think that might also be the subject to some extent of Ezra Klein's forthcoming book, which I know is specifically about polarization and identity, and he talked a little bit about it on the podcast.
So, folks, here's a direct and tangible piece of advice. If you find yourself getting into a conversation with a loved one, relative, spouse, or even just a friend or a coworker on whether or not we ought to be impeaching the president of the United States, do not make the assumption that the other individual is coming from a bad place because they disagree even 180 degrees with where you're starting from. And however it is you choose to go about having that conversation, start by acknowledging the fact that you think that person has some good intentions and it's coming from the right place. Because if you don't think that they have good intentions and you don't think they're coming from the right place, well, what are you doing trying to have a conversation with a person like that to begin with, where you're trying to change their mind?
Right.
If you've chosen to engage somebody who you think is bad faith, well, there may be a reason to do that, but the right way to even have a conversation like that is to be very humble, to try and show that person that you are looking, or that you see the humanity in them and are trying to call that forth. And that's a whole level up in terms of depolarizing dialogue. But most of the conversations you're going to have with your family and friends aren't going to be like that. They're going to be with people who you know are good, people who you know have some experiences or some motivations you can empathize with. So do that.
Right. And I think it's also important to try to avoid projecting your feelings toward a certain political figure with whom you do not have a personal relationship.
Right.
With whom your relationship is purely political,
right,
onto someone with whom you do have a personal, intimate, or civic relationship.
Right. That's right. That's right. Approach every conversation. Our friend Peter Boghossian would give this piece of advice. Approach every conversation as if the other person in the dialogue is a partner with you in the pursuit of truth.
Even if they don't like rap music.
Even if they don't like rap music. This is a polarizing issue between you and Mr. Shapiro.
Come on, Ben. Come on the show for a little rap battle.
There you go, man.
Open invitation.
Bring the violin. But yeah, so let us be partners in the pursuit of truth, and forge these partnerships with goodwill, and we'll move forward.
Cool, man. Should we wrap things up for today?
Let's wrap.
All right. Excellent. Thank you guys for listening. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or one of the other platforms where you can find this podcast. Please also let us know what you think. If you thought it was weird that I talked about how President Obama smells, let me know. That was pretty weird.
Right.
You know.
And please share.
If you
Twitter,
think,
Facebook, social media.
You know, John's voice makes you feel a certain kind of way.
Oh, Lord.
Let us know.
This guy. Crossing all sorts of lines.
If you think I'm full of hot air, let me know. But no, email us, media@better-angels.org. We love to get your feedback. We also love to get your suggestions, and we're also open to just having folks on the air. Particularly, we'd love to have people who strongly support President Trump, because we haven't had as many of those folks on as we'd like. And I think that's been a shortcoming of ours. I think it's sometimes difficult.
It's tough to put it out there sometimes. We have friends who we've asked to come on and join us who are afraid of making it public, that they're supporters of the president. And, these are folks who usually live in an area or work in a field where they politically just feel like, it would be a risk for them to express their preference and point of view. And that is a sad testimony to the state of our politics. It's exactly the type of issue that Better Angels exists to challenge. And so, folks, if you have a story that you think is worth telling, feel free to reach out to us. And we definitely want to get the range of voices on, because pro-Trump, anti-Trump, whatever. I mean, this is America. You've got a right to your view, and furthermore, this is a country that we have to share and build together.
Indeed. It takes love, it takes affection, it takes humility, it takes forgiveness, but it also takes courage.
Right.
This is America. This is the Better Angels podcast, and we will talk to you soon.
Peace.